Good afternoon, wonderful people. Thanks for tuning in once again, and lovely to see you all. I've got a very special guest today who I've been tracking down for a number of months, even years now, I think, actually. It's Eve Lorgan, and Eve has a background in counselling, hypnotherapy, and trauma research. As well as being an author, Eve is a Hatha Yoga and Taoist Qigong practitioner. She's worked with alien abductees, Mylabs, and mind control victims. And Eve is well known for her work surrounding the alien love bite phenomenon, which we'll get into today. And she wrote the very, very interesting book, The Love Bite. And she has a website, evelorgan.com, and a private Facebook group, Alien Love Bite. And of course, you can find her book, The Love Bite, Alien Interference in Human Love Relationships, via our website. Eve, welcome. Great to have you on. Like I say, super excited to host this today, because it's getting into all those dark and yucky parts where all of this is coming from, I think. So
I think more people are sensing that there's a little more going on than what's just in the physical world.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the alien card is being played right now in this time, but there certainly has been more sightings and that kind of thing. Although I don't really work within the quote UFO phenomena so much anymore. But in my early days, what they called it, what I worked with, Barbara Bartholic and Dr. Carla Turner's work is what really inspired me in the beginning, way back in the 90s. And we called it then, in the early days, it was like UFO abduction. If somebody had a sighting of some kind of UFO or flying saucer, and then they experienced missing time following that, and then had weird dreams or flashbacks or medical issues, and then just a whole series of unusual phenomena that will happen. So really, it started with the alien abduction phenomena and all the things that happen in people's lives. So that's actually what led me to do more research with how these quote ETs and aliens who are taking people, and they usually take people more than one time. So most of the people that I've basically did counseling and support groups with and interviews had multiple alien visitations, encounters, or abductions, depending on their situation. So then they follow a pattern where many of them had their relationships orchestrated, set up, broke up, or manipulated in some way, or they were targeted with another partner by the aliens who literally put them together with someone to play out this drama that we started calling the alien love bite. So that's how it all started, and it sounds absolutely nuts, but it's actually the name of that quote alien love bite is an abductee somewhere in California who they knew that they were having like these weird like love obsessions where they would just be totally obsessed with somebody that they might have seen in an abduction, and they meet him and all these weird synchronicities would happen, like it's being orchestrated. And so they called it the alien love bite. Although my book now, I just call it the love bite. It's for short. So that's kind of how it started.
Wow.
I got a lot of laughs and a lot of, people think it's crazy and nuts, but really I was compelled to say something because at the time in UFO research, they wanted to keep it, as credible as possible, with as much scientific, and it was all this Roswell this, and, and the human hybrid medical exams was maybe the extent people would go, or it wouldn't be credible. But really behind the scenes, when you talk to the people on a regular basis and let's say develop a friendship with a group of people who are having ongoing experiences, you come to find out there's a lot more going on. And so that's what I wrote about. Like there's an element of what I felt was, spiritual warfare, for lack of a better term, so that if someone really wanted to find the truth of their experiences, and let's say they would want to go to a therapist and unravel the memories through a hypnotic regression, or they would go to a UFO conference with the intent of healing and getting to the truth of something, then that's when a lot of the weird stuff would start to happen that showed there's an interference pattern going on. Wow. Including like being set up in relationships or suddenly having their marriage broken up when they were in their healing process, or when they were doing whistleblowing, anything like that. So those are the things that I actually wrote about and interviewed more people on.
Wow.
So I don't know if you have a specific question, because I mean, this goes into a lot of case histories. In fact, I could show you
I've
I
got
mean, you
lots
could
of
look on,
questions.
this is the first book, the Love Bite.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, at least 10 plus case histories of people who've had and reported that they were set up or interfered with. And that one's actually pretty good. And it goes into a lot of discussion, like bloodlines and more of the alien abduction UFO angle of the ET kind of window. And then the last book in 2012 is The Dark Side of Cupid.
Yeah.
And this is about love affairs, the supernatural, and energy vampirism.
Right.
And really it's kind of a step up from the Love Bite, where people reported similar themes, but it wasn't always clear if this is like an alien thing or they were abducted, but they certainly had the kind of relationship that showed there was what I call the third party entity interference of some way, where somebody's like hosted by a entity like a reptilian or an alien, or there's an alien interacting in the love drama somehow.
Yeah.
So it's still very real, and it continues to happen. I continue to get reports all the time.
Yeah.
So it's not going away, and it's a phenomenon that happens. So it's my job as a therapist, though, to try to find as many, standard psychological explanations that can help someone who's having a relationship that's having these kinds of dynamics. Like, for example, narcissistic abuse is common with people who, let's say, they have a partner who's, I hate to say it, but they're demonically possessed, or they're hosted or oppressed by some like malevolent entities that are feeding on energy as a narcissistic supply. So clairvoyant people have reported this to me over and over again, so that this is not something we're making up. It's more likely that most people who do have narcissistic personality disorder have some kind of entity attachment. I bet you have found that in your own work as well.
Yeah, I have, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of toxic relationships. You often pull off some kind of reptilian or something that's attached, that's very nefarious. But yeah, and I'm finding as well in my own work that it seems to be that these attacks and these energies are getting even more intense. So some people seem to be getting even more targeted than. I've been doing it for around 6 years now, but I've noticed lately in the last sort of 6 months that, they're getting more crafty and almost more desperate, I guess, which I guess is a reflection of their agenda, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm seeing that too, where there's more of a spiritual warfare element, even in a general sense, that could be augmented or facilitated through some kinds of artificial intelligence, Wi-Fi technology, communications, like through the power of the principality of the air, plus technologies that will enable that transmission. And I think that's actually happening. And I know it sounds nutty, but sometimes, if you turn your Wi-Fi off or whatever, and you don't have any of those communications around you in your sleeping quarters, you'll find that you sleep better and there's less interference. So I think certain things are actually happening through certain technologies.
Yeah.
But the Love Bite itself, though, in terms of, the relationship thing, that tends to be, either the person is definitely having ongoing alien encounters because of their genetics or what family they're born in. And sometimes people are just born into it.
Yeah.
Or they're in a what we call MK Ultra related mind control projects that may involve the secret space program or the Montauk project or the Phoenix project or any number of things that are related to MK Ultra. And I know it sounds bad, but what they call the satanic ritual abuse kinds of experiences. And then they actually have a high degree of interference and relationship setups and, outright demonic and reptilian and Draco, depending on their family and their involvement. So I've run across that, and I really never intended to actually do this.
Yeah.
But I kept running into them over and over again, and they wanted help. And then I realized, wow, this is hardcore. Not only in mind control, but it's a type of spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
So, inevitably they will come and try to attack you too, right? And then we'll do it through your own relationships, sometimes through family or work or anybody. So it's common for whistleblowers or even healers who are actually doing a good job.
Yeah.
And then sometimes, maybe a new client or a new business person or a friend or a lover or whatever, employer will come into your life. And then I'm sure you've noticed this because you're clairvoyant, right? I mean, and then they come in and handle somebody. So they'll handle somebody through someone who's like manipulated or mind controlled or hosted by the entity that's working for the hierarchy that says, okay, we got to control and neutralize this person. And then they aim somebody in that, you know, in their life. And I know it sounds like it's kind of far-fetched, but this
Definitely
was
doesn't
actually,
he?
it was actually confirmed through a woman who James Bartley and I had met and interviewed several times. She's passed away now, of course. And she was a monarch mind-controlled slave from a, you know, satanic ritual abuse bloodline kind of situation. And she discovered the truth through, it wasn't a husband, but it was her boyfriend. I think he was in the UK, in fact. And she wrote a book, something like The Body Snatchers, or I don't know, it was some kind of body snatcher name, but her boyfriend was like a full-on reptilian host. And he knew he was a host, and he was controlling and manipulating and like torturing her and trying to handle her and keep her from speaking up. But sometimes when these reptilian hosts, they get really cocky, and they think they have so much control that they just basically tell you, right? So she found out all this inside information through, you know, having a boyfriend and then going to one healer after another, like 20 plus healers to try to help her get rid of like an entity. And then found out that like some of them who were like these full-on hosts who were reptilian hybrids or whatever. It's also nuts. Me and James have talked about this numerous times, and he could probably explain it better than I can because he remembers specifics. But I remember, you know, reading it in the book and talking to her that the reptilian hosted boyfriend, I guess he told her that there's others that they know they're all hosted. So they have this secret network kind of thing going on. And the hosted ones know who each other is. In fact, they're clairvoyant, and they oftentimes they know if you know, and they know if you can see. And then they will attack you, or there will be like their secret brotherhood kind of thing, but they would actually work together in a network and stay up all night till, you know, the odd hours in the morning. And then they would have lists of people that they would target through the internet, through whatever. And they would basically target people, and they would network with each other to go online and to, you know, be a troll or do this or do that to attack people who knew what they were doing and who they were.
Yeah.
So I know that this is real. This is more real than just, you know, oh, I just some clairvoyant thing. This is real.
Yeah, I think it's something that the whole of humanity eventually is going to have to get its head around, really. The fact that we're sharing this dimension with other entities, basically. We're not just dealing with humans. And I think a lot of the alternative media, they talk about, you know, perhaps these cult members that are behind, you know, the New World Order and all of that. They have these entities working through them, but we don't tend to talk about the fact that the guy down the road might have something working through him as well. And a lot of like quote unquote normal humans that we can come into contact with. In fact, most people have entities. It's just how, you know, how bad they are. So yeah, really fascinating with that. So in terms of people being targeted, it seems to be that there's a certain type of soul that's coming down here right now that seems to get hit hard. I refer to them as non-human souls, and they tend to just be more connected. You know, perhaps they're more in touch with their psychic abilities, more open-hearted, more intuitive. And they tend to be the ones, like you say, that get hit sort of straight from birth and get put into these families. And so is that what you found?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a subset of people. For example, many people actually do get targeted, although sometimes if the person really did their full-on recovery and healing and empowerment work authentically, they would be less likely to be targeted as bad. In general, like there's ways to work on empowerment and healing, but then there's some who are actually very unique, who are of a certain bloodline or genetic signature, or they remember like previous incarnations. They're super psychic, they're reality creators. And some of them that we've called, that if they were, actually didn't have to be women, but we called it the Starflyer bloodline people, who tended to have a higher degree of psychic ability and reality creation manifestation abilities, as well as they could open and close portals, or they're able to perceive parallel timelines or realities. So there is a certain subset of people that tend to, and then they're definitely targeted, and then they'll be set up in love bites with usually like a hosted person or somebody who's very mind controlled. And sometimes they're in like the bloodline families, that the super wealthy elite bloodline. They may not be one of the 13, right? There's so many of them, but they might be in the offshoot of one of these bloodline families. And sometimes they don't realize it until they're way into their adulthood that, oh my God, this has been going on all along. And that a lot of the mind control and the handling actually takes place on these hyperdimensional levels. And even subtle mind control goes on in these astral realms. So it's not always like as hardcore fundamentals as some kind of, hypno MK ultra based on what you learned 20 years ago, right? It's much more subtle, and it does happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely hear from those kinds of people.
Yeah, it's fascinating how the lengths that they go to as well with some of these people. Unbelievable how just these people that are born into these ritual abuse. And when you work with them, you can really tell, you can really understand why they've been targeted as well, because they seem to be so sharp. They're very, even though they've been through so much trauma, a lot of them retain their sense of humor, and really strong, powerful souls that I've found since working with them. But you mentioned the arrogance there of the reptilians. I've found that as well.
God, if that's not a hallmark, I don't know what is. Like I call it like Luciferian arrogance is a hallmark of Luciferian and hosted reptilian, as well as narcissistic personality disorder. It's definitely a hallmark, like the haughtiness and the arrogance, and sometimes extreme high intelligence.
Yeah.
You definitely will find the arrogance is a hallmark
Yeah.
of that. And
Yeah.
it's sad because I see it with people who, as a therapist, with people who've been very traumatized or who have been through the Illuminati bloodline family ordeals, which a lot of it may be trauma-based mind control and sexual abuse and the whole 9 yards. But a lot of them, if they're not fully healed, they kind of, you get the stain of arrogance when you're from these families. I hate to say that, but I see it over and over again like this. They're super proud of, their genetics or their bloodline or their family line, and they'll kind of go into like anal retentive kinds of obsession with the specialness of the bloodline. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a part of, the trauma, but it's also part of the how they're programmed and how they're raised. So it's kind of sad, but
yeah. But it's interesting because you see that theme, that arrogance running through world leaders and the politics and the cult essentially that are rolling out this agenda right now. I've always thought that it will eventually be their arrogance that brings them down. They're just so in your face with everything. And I'm hoping that will be the case sooner rather than later.
yeah, they stop at nothing really. It's concerning because even as a therapist, right? Or with what I've learned on top of it all, like with narcissistic personality disorder and the cluster Bs, what we call, they will basically not stop in their preservation of the false mask, false ego. And like a psychopath, for example, they will never stop fighting until the death, until it'd be like the psychopath who breaks up with someone, or somebody breaks up with them, and they'll say, well, if I can't have you, nobody can. And then they kill them, they kill themselves, and they'll shoot a whole room of people. And that's the psychology of a lot of these psychopathic, demonically hosted people who I think they've made pacts with the devil, for lack of a better term. And that once that happens, they lose their ability to have the humility and the empathy and to do the real healing work. They really think they don't have healing work to do, or they're so taken over, which is really scary because, if you would predict the behaviors, it's not a good picture unless people find a way to deal with this.
Yeah.
And I think this is why I've studied the cluster B personality disorders at length to try to understand how to not only deal with it if you have a conflict with one or you've been very hurt by one, that you don't do what would psychologically be the normal thing that a normal person would do to explain yourself or to defend yourself or to fight back, that those strategies usually end up in the person getting hurt worse, unless their weapons are much, much better and they've outnumbered the lying charade of the narcissist, but in general, you have to find a whole new strategy of dealing with that.
Yeah. And just on your comment there about them being very smart, I feel like I've had my own experience with surrounding this phenomenon. And that's what actually drew me to your work in the first place a few years ago now. But in terms of smartness, I feel like they kind of present themselves being very different at the start of the relationship. Is that something that you found with
Yeah.
with working to people?
Yeah, there's usually a grandiosity and a specialness that they're very unique, and sometimes it's more covert, um, or they just think they're special and they're really better than other people. Like they're smarter, they're more psychic, or they're just better. I mean, they really, really believe it. So the arrogance kind of really, I think that prevents the true healing process,
Yeah.
and that's very dangerous, you know. And sometimes they are smart, so it's almost like if they really are like super high Q people who have gone into the over intellectual realm, or they're able to get the narcissistic supply, they're not likely to heal. And as long as they can get the narcissistic supply, they'll just keep going.
Yeah.
And they look powerful.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Crazy. So what? Probably got some listeners that, well,
like,
what do I
what's
do?
going on?
I'm single. I want to meet someone. what, what sort
How's
of
the dating going? Oh
signs do
God.
I need to look out for? What sort of characteristics do these love bite relationships?
Um, with a love bite, most of the people that I worked with who offered me their case histories were those who were maybe on the end of the relationship where they were hurt because there was a switching off or an inability to consummate the relationship, or the partner, the love bite partner, broke it off with them or just wasn't interested. So I tended to get that part of the story, although I did run across people who were on both ends of the love bite because they were abductees, or they were a Mylab in a project where this happens a lot. Like they'll set them up, and they might set them up with somebody who, oh, they have a mutual attraction at first, and maybe it works for a while, and then they may switch off one partner because it's no longer useful for their purposes, which there's multiple purposes that I won't go into in the love bite, like why does this happen and how does it happen. So there are some people who've had both ends where they were the ones who somebody set them up and the other person was like literally obsessed with them and had these dreams of them, and they knew they were abducted and blah blah blah, but then they didn't have the reciprocal feelings, and then the other person pined away, and then they were having like the classic alien love bite situation. So it can go both ways. So I guess I learned about this from Barbara Bartholic in terms of the whole, what she would call it, the drama of the love obsession would play out in a certain way after the aliens would put them together, usually during a classic alien abduction experience, although it wasn't always a physical experience per se, although it could have been remembered that way. So they would put them together, and a lot of times it would be like Dr. Carla Turner would say, well, they would present a virtual reality scenario, and it feels like they get abducted astrally or their consciousness, or they will imprint a kind of virtual reality scenario in their mind. It's very like a very lucid dream in their bedroom even, and then put them together with someone, and then they'll do like for example, it's almost like they had this holodeck technology with some people who reported it. And there's one of them in my book where they did this thing. She knows she's in an abduction, but remembering it like it's a lucid dream. And then she's in a sterile kind of environment that's like an alien ship with like white walls or whatever. And then they do like an overlay over it of a typical bedroom or living room scene. And then they will add to this, you know, another abductee, another targeted partner, and then they'll add it in mind control kind of virtual reality scenario that you feel a certain way, or this person, you know, appears a certain way, and then they'll just play these games. So if you get lucid, and some people were lucid enough to like, oh my God, this is like mind control, right? And then that's how we figured out, well, they're doing like the classic, you know, hotel room scene where you're with the targeted partner, and then they're doing something to the partner. Actually, they're abducting them too, or they're doing some kind of implant procedure. And then they use you to calm the other abductee down. And then meanwhile, you had this like love bitey kind of love connection with the other person, trying to help them and create this connection with them. So they'll put together all these any scenario that gets you compelled to feel a connection.
Wow.
And then they will even pull up, I believe they have a way of looking into your past to be able to find memories, either real current life memories or other lifetime memories. And this was something that was told to me by someone who was very lucid, where the aliens actually told her that they were trying to find out if her and these two other men would be matchable in basically they didn't call it a love bite, but I know it was a love bite. And they would look and see if there were past life connections with these people. And they had a way of finding out through energy tendrils that would like link in on this psychic way. They could tell just by looking at them, like, oh, they've had a past life. So let's, you know, strengthen these, catalyze these connections and create a scenario and see if they meet under these synchronistic, coincidental. And like the synchronicities are totally like, you feel like they're staged when they happen. Like, okay, then you dream about them and then their image is like blasted in your mind. And then you have all these sexual feelings like, wow, it's like an implant's activated. Then, oh, you just suddenly meet them and then you get an email and then the car in front of you has their name on their license plate while a song is playing on the radio. I mean, it's unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
How it makes you feel like, oh my God, this is my soulmate. I mean, this is divinely ordained, and they're just fucking with reality and putting things together so that you meet the person. And then when you meet the person, if it's like successful, then, you know, you have the super feelings of magical connection. Sometimes both will have psychic abilities spontaneously happen at the same time where they didn't have them before, but their energies just melded. So it amped their Kundalini kind of thing.
Right.
And would have mutually shared dreams together in the astral space, or a mutual kind of, they would call it an abduction or a visitation, depending on, you know, who they are. And then, so that's why, I mean, I explained it in the book. There's several kinds of experiences where they will have the mutually shared dream or abduction or Mylab operation scenario where they, I mean, it's just crazy. But they know all about sexual energy, just like a tantric sorcerer would.
Yeah.
And maybe amplify it with certain kinds of technologies that we don't understand to manipulate our energy field in a tantric way with these sexual love obsession connections, where you feel like it's your twin flame thing. And then once that energy is amplified in certain individuals, not all, then they will use that person in a, what we used to call it Mylab. Now they're just secret space program and super soldiers, but hey, MK Ultra is MK Ultra. All right.
Yeah.
So I'm clear about this because MK Ultra is always abusive.
Yeah.
So there's no reason to exonerate being in the secret space program. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah,
I get pissed. So anyway, they'll put people together. This is what has been reported where, oh, they have a connection that they might remember it in a dream, or they'll have a literal, this is crazy, reptilian sexual experience where the reptilian enters like the room, but they're interdimensional. But they will move the bed like it's full physical, and they'll move your body like it's physical, but they're invisible, but you feel them. And then like a whole sexual experience, like you're having sex with an invisible, like reptilian, right?
Yeah.
And then amplifying the Kundalini. And then that's like, it's almost like an abduction, rape, like right in your bedroom. And then after that, then the military will come with their Mylab operations, come and pick them up, and then utilize them on some kind of operation that may include remote viewing or some kind of psychic ability, because it was just amplified by the reptilian that just had basically a rape, sex, Kundalini experience. So this is like a dynamic that would happen that makes you realize there's more to this than just, you know, oh, experimenting on people to see what they do. Like, this is not an experiment. This is a harvesting operation for a specific reason, because they know how to manipulate our energy and our power to achieve certain ends.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Pretty mind blowing.
I know, it's absolutely nuts, but I actually got pictures.
Who needs
I was lucky to have an artist work for me who was one in our group.
Yeah.
And he actually did sketches in my Love Bite book, and I don't know if in my second book I had any sketches from him, but he did some sketches for us about things that we would describe, because there was a group of us, and this is how it started. Like when I had a group in San Diego County in the mid 90s, right, or till 2000 whatever. James Bartley and we met people who lived in mostly Southern California and the desert Southwest and the high desert of Southern California, where there was many underground bases and military installation kind of places. And there tended to be a lot more UFO and Mylab activity in those areas.
Mm-hmm.
So we basically just did a lot of talking and a lot of visiting with people and shared information and found out that these things weren't happening. But during this process, and I think this happens with many Mylabs, you might notice this with clients, I don't know, but we started noticing that we were having experiences together, that only since we met, then we would have experiences together, like a group of 5 of us would have experiences where we could mutually tell one another, like witness testimony that we all dreamed the same thing. There was basically mutually shared dreaming abduction scenarios with some physical evidence with at least 1 or 2 people. Wow. So that this was not just making up things. This was definitely something was happening, and then they were experimenting or taking us to see what we'd remember and putting us in these scenarios. And maybe it was all like mind control games to make us see what we would remember and what we would share. I mean, we don't know, but I know that this is real, that these things happen. So that sometimes like a certain client or a certain person would come to the group, and then they would be heavily handled or under surveillance by their handlers. And then like I've had them where an alien actually came to my house. I know it's in an astral interdimensional way.
Yeah.
Where it really appeared in the bedroom, and it was a very tall, you know how tall grays look?
Yeah.
And it was like actually a tall gray, but it was a black tall gray that almost had a sparkly kind of skin. It was really weird, and wore this big cloak like thing.
Yeah.
And it basically threatened me to stay away from their person, that he's theirs. They lay claim to that person, and you stop it. And then they actually stopped certain things that I was doing in my lucid dreaming dream yoga practices. I was literally doing experiments where we could connect with each other on these other levels of reality. And I was able to do that. And then they would stop me, and then they would threaten me. And so then I noticed there was a lot of interference with certain of the abductees that would come to me. And then their handlers would come and try to like stop the group, and they would, do the nightmare attacks the night before or the night after. They would, the phone would be shut off for like a day and a half, and then the computer wouldn't work, and then they couldn't get through, or, like the whole 9 yards. They would get stopped from coming, So it was clear that there's some kind of interference going on, and more than just technology. I think this was spiritual warfare too.
It's crazy, isn't it? Like, I always try and flip it though, because you can get a bit down about it otherwise. Just like the amount of targeting, just not even when you look at 3D with all the stuff that's in the food and the air and the water, and just the fact that we have to, as humans, pay to live. We have to pay for food and shelter, and so we have all that to deal with. And then we have all the stuff that you and I are talking about in the astral, in the etheric realms. And it just goes to show really and truly how powerful we are, because they would only do that, you would imagine, because they're in fear, right?
Yes, I think that's true. And I agree that we need to have a sense of humor, and to not get dragged down in negativity, because that definitely can happen with people who've been in trauma and certain personality disorders, where they actually may feed on the negativity, but it's part of their belief system that they've been conditioned to believe in, the learned helplessness. So that's why I believe that therapeutically doing a recovery process that one would do for any kind of narcissistic abuse, and if you want to beef up your spiritual power, that to work with integrity and like a humble, pure heart, and working in a kind and humble way in the world, but setting your boundaries and learning how to create your reality by focusing on what you really want and trying not to obsess on negativity. And that is something that's that happens, like if you've been very traumatized and or you're in a narcissistically abusive relationship pattern that you can't get out of, it's hard not to like obsess on all the bad stuff that they're doing and how they make you feel. But even the obsession itself, which goes back into the love bite, because it is an obsession. It's like a spell has been cast, and then the person kind of falls in this obsessive thing that they can't really stop.
Mm.
So, but obsession is actually a sign of complex PTSD that has not been healed or fully dealt with or recognized. So that needs to be dealt with to have a full recovery, and then you get your power back.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I always say, that doing the subconscious, the inner work right now is so key in all of this, because they use them, as you mentioned there, they use it all against us, don't they? Our wounds.
Yes. Yeah. And they know it well, don't they? I mean, not only in people who seem to have a sixth sense, like in the, I get a lot of clients that believe they've had narcissistic abuse in their relationships, where they're either broke up, or trying to break up with someone who's a classic narcissistic personality disorder or a cluster B. And it, because that comes with it a lot of anguish and sometimes demonic activity or
Mm.
reptilian. So it's hard for them not to be obsessed and fall into the victimization of what's happening. And it doesn't mean it's not real and that this happens. It's just that in recovery, you have to get to a point where you could no longer obsess on it
Mm.
and really work on constructive change, which means looking at ourselves, just like someone would if you went to a 12-step group for a family member of an alcoholic, and work on what we can do to gain our power back and to set the appropriate boundaries and work on our own issues of feeling like we need to micromanage someone who's got a big problem.
Mm.
You know, you basically have to let go.
Yeah.
And which means sometimes setting boundaries with people who you know are like messed up with entity attachments. If they don't deal with their stuff, like you just like got to set the boundary.
Yeah, and a lot of people that are targeted, they have that kind of empathic, sensitive blueprint, don't they? It's like, I think it's that transmutive energy of negative energy. I think that's one of the reasons they're here, some of those people. And I think often they can struggle to set boundaries, can't they? I think that's an issue.
Yeah. I had to learn about it and kind of take a hard look at myself, you know, in terms of what I was going through, because I went through the love bite more than once, let's put it that way. And then I had to realize my own history and my own tendencies, and, you know, what could I do to take control of my life and set boundaries. And a lot of it was codependency, which, you know, it's codependency plus alien abduction and all the 9 yards, which is
Mhm.
more. But even working with that and learning how to work with that helps.
Mm.
But the empathy, I mean, I don't know. I think it's just a natural part of some people are very sensitive to, you know, the feelings of others, but really wanting to do the right thing and not wanting to hurt someone else or hurt their feelings. But sometimes we have to be a little braver and not be so nice
Yeah,
because there are those that take advantage of that. So
I think in the New Age movement as well, there's this kind of tag like I'm an empath, and I find it a little bit. It can be a bit disempowering, can't it? Because people say, "Oh, well, I'm an empath," so they can sort of slip into that victim mentality then, can't they? Because they're an empath. So it's being, I guess, it's like streetwise spirituality. I guess is where we need to be at.
yeah, and I see that too, like what I call spiritual bypassing, or things that I've noticed over the years that would be probably classic New Age terminology and belief systems. For example, because I have a degree in a master's in counseling psychology, so I learn these psychotherapy terminology and what's behind things. But there are many practitioners who are not professional psychology peoples, and they will use the terminology of a new age this or that, or it's just an ascension system, or, you know, you're going to meet your soulmate and they went to a psychic, and they're not doing like the real, like even an empath, if they're like, I'm an empath, well, does that mean are you getting, did you have narcissistic abusely relationship,
Mm.
and you find yourself, you know, getting taken advantage of over and over again, and what's that about? So sometimes we need to take responsibility for why is that pattern repeating itself, and how can we use the empathy in a way where you become strong and set boundaries and don't be grandiose about being an empath all the while. You know, they're bad mouthing all these narcissists, but like, what recovery work are they really doing to get back into their power?
Yeah.
And so you have to ask that question.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's taking responsibility, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's hard because the rebuilding process takes time.
Yeah.
When you've been beaten down and just about killed.
Yeah.
I think that's why I'm so serious about the work. I mean, it sounds nutty, but this is something that can kill you.
Yeah.
And I know people who've been murdered, right? A lot of my mentors and people that I know who've been whistleblowers or who were Mylabs or who had setups or marriages that were setups and they just didn't survive. They died in their 40s of some kind of disease or they were killed. I mean, one person was literally killed during an abduction scenario where they tortured her, and then she came back with a dislocated shoulder and some injuries, and then you can't prove it because it happened in an abduction. And then tortured in her sleep till she had a stroke, and then, you know, the partner of that person, and they didn't have a good relationship. It was a bad marriage. You know, deliberately waited 30 minutes before calling an ambulance to make sure she died. And then she was plugged in for a week, and then he unplugged her. But he was already on dating sites before she died and already dating within a week after her death. So,
going on,
and I know
people asleep.
Died down. Yeah.
Wow, that's intense. Yeah.
I know it's heavy, but I have to say it because
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
so serious.
No, we need to get the truth out there for sure. So what about sort of cloning and all that stuff? Are you aware of any of that going on?
Oh my God. It goes on and on and on. Well, there was a woman who's in my lab who I interviewed at least 4 times in the span of at least 15 years. I don't know. 2011, I think, was the first time I interviewed her, a Scandinavian woman who I called her name Marit. And it started out with her realization that she's having these military alien abductions with concrete medical symptoms and being experimented on medically. And also going through the Dr. Corrado Malanga integration protocol of removing the alien entities and their attachment. It's very complex, but she went through this. But what was really good about this particular case study, she did realize that she was cloned, right? And then, so the cloning happens to many who have memories, and it was actually quite traumatic. But her and her son, I think, went through the same thing. And one of them was they put you in these cylinders, and there's a diagram on the article in my site, one of the interviews, because there's like 4. And Dr. Corrado Malanga of Italy worked with people who've had alien abductions for 25 years and created really good strategies and research. And he's like a university PhD in Italy. So he's super smart and knows how to figure stuff out, and basically found out of the cloning technologies. And it has to do with like being put in a cylinder. There's like ones that are horizontal and ones that are vertical. And there's many who have had memories of being in some kind of liquid that they were breathing, or in a cylinder that's full of some weird liquid, or being placed in some kind of containment cubicle pod of some sort. And then the woman that I interviewed, she said that there was some kind of high frequency thing that was turned on when her body, and this was her physical body. So they took her physical body, they put it in there, and then they put this high frequency thing that would literally like shake, like super shake him, almost like a high sonification kind of thing that shook out her etheric energy body out of the body. And then it would go through into another, almost like go through some like tube pipe thing, and then go into another container that was a cylinder that had the clone body in it. So they transferred the soul from the real body through this high energy sonification, whatever process that literally yanks out the soul of the body and then transfers it into the clone body. And then they would use the clone body, or they would experiment on it. And, you know, usually it's younger, like they'll have a clone body be in different age stages, and they may have many clones of one person, by the way. And they could do it at different stages, and they keep them in stasis, sometimes in these drawers or in these cylinders that are in these rooms, like with tons of clones. And so she talked about how she experienced that, and it was very traumatizing. And that in her case, they did it numerous times over and over and over again. So one of the side effects of this high sonification, energy, vibration technology, like your soul's pulled out over and over and over again, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So the side effect is like you have an NDE over and over and over.
yeah.
So she gets super psychic and just pop in and out of her body and remote view and super psychic. So they used her, you know, as that was just one of the ways they used her. But in people who are in these projects, they may utilize them in any number of ways. Sometimes it's just the quote hybrid breeding program where it's medical associated with that. And sometimes they need to test new medical things in conjunction with pharmaceutical companies that exist on this earth that she knew, but we didn't put the name down because we didn't want to get targeted, that exist. And then, you know, recognizing people in the real 3D world, in the medical world, seeing one of the doctors who was in the abductions in the underground base, who's a doctor in the above world, who's hosted by a reptilian who's working with these pharmaceutical companies. Okay, so the connections between all these things are reported within a single experience. So I would say yes to the cloning, but not only that, there's people who report they don't know how they're remembering these experiences. And Dr. Corrado Malanga thought that in some cases, let's say I would interview or talk to Mylabs or abductees, and they would have these like bizarre, they weren't just dreams, they were like super vivid, lucid dreams, like, oh, I think I had an abduction, but this is how it's remembered and experienced as a super vivid dream, but it's like a virtual reality scenario where you're stuck in this virtual reality scenario of like all these different warfare conflict scenarios, like they're testing and training you under all these different conditions, and it could be like war in the Middle East or, you know, alien invasion or whatever, right? And then you can't get out of it. It's like your mind is stuck in these freaking dreams, and then you keep waking up and going back to the same dream, like they keep doing the same thing over and over again. So those are the kinds of things they report. But it's a long story short, people do report clones. And now what they're saying, and some of the people in the secret space program, not all of them like go public. Most people don't go public at all. So I get a lot of stories where they just want to talk. They don't want to go public. They don't want, you know.
Yeah.
So they talk about, they remember, oh, well, you know, I had an experience that was like an operation, secret operation, where they pull out your soul, they pop you in a clone body, and then that clone body, you know, has to have sex with someone or goes on a, you know, operation warfare or surveillance or remote viewing or whatever in the clone body, and the clone body is oftentimes younger, so you get the looped memories of the clone body.
Right.
That was on the op. So this is a very sophisticated process, but they know how to do this, and they're like, what, years ahead of, you know, civilian technology.
Yeah.
So that's why people don't believe what's happening, because they can't conceive of the possibility that this is possible. But in reality, like when they take people, like the intelligence agencies and people who are working in these secret projects, they know. They're obsessed with magic and the occult, and then they use people to do remote viewing and, you know, future prognostication, and, you know, they gather the data. Whereas like in the quote real world, they'll think, oh, well, that doesn't have any credibility. But meanwhile, behind the scenes, they abduct you to a remote view and, you know, do all this looking glass technology stuff, and, you know, to do the future. You go on, you know, time travel.
What's looking
I'm
glass?
telling you, it's crazy.
What's looking glass technology?
Well, looking glass technology is a name that was used by people. I know Carrie Cassidy used this term in some of her interviews with people. My first introduction to it was through talking with Andrew DiBiasio, who was in Project Pegasus, and he did go public, you know, after, I mean, I spoke with him for years before he went public, and we would talk for hours about the Project Pegasus thing he remembered as a child, being put in a time travel type of technology with other children in the 70s. And so there was actually 3 different kinds of time travel technology that they used that he remembered. He had a very lucid memory of his experiences, where most people who were, that he knew were involved, they just didn't want to talk, or they didn't remember, or they were still actually mind controlled. They were in like one of these bloodline families where they had like some high coochie whatever job, right? Like with an NASA or with, you know, high level tech or whatever, but they were unrecovered MK Ultra people who don't want to talk, or they they just don't think it's real, or they don't want to go there.
Mm.
So anyway, it was the chronovisor. And then it was kind of like they project a 3D, almost like on TV. I don't know if the early one was like black and white, oscilloscope kind of stuff. And then there was 2 other types where you literally go through a Stargate or a jump gate. They had different names. You do it individually or you do it in groups. And then there was the Montauk chair, which was another form of time travel technology, where they actually send your consciousness or they send your body. So in Andy Basaggio's case, they did do it physically. They actually teleported from like New Jersey to New Mexico for a 3-month training. And then they would go to Mars, they would go to different places. So other people that I've talked to report like going through jump gates or stargates, or going in group in mass for certain conflict, warfare kinds of operations. So it's definitely reported. So, and I think some people can be used for this more than others. And this is something, I don't think Andy talked about this, but the Captain K, quote, Randy Kramer and the secret space program with the Mars Defense Force talked about this. And I interviewed him years before he went public as well. But I think there must be a genetic component where it's genetic and soul frequency. When they could match certain parameters together, they'll have a certain super soldier who's augmented maybe genetically, where they have a easier capability of doing interdimensional travel and going in and out of portals, or they can open them themselves. And there's a genetic soul frequency signature, which only certain people have those abilities. And that might be why they're mining like certain bloodlines and certain genetics and then tweaking them, sometimes in the womb, or they have a way to find out who you are even before you're born. And then they could tweak your parents. And then, if there's time travel, like even with aliens, they could have gone back, I don't know how many generations to streamline a certain genetic quality and then set up marriages and different things. And so when I did my early research, we found out, oh, well, this was set up. Like some marriages were definitely set up so that they would maybe have children who were also taken in these projects, but not all of them had children. So the reason behind a setup may be different, but in some, they did have a downline of a child, or maybe out of 2 or 3 kids, maybe only one is utilized in a project long term, but the other 2 may have been tested in early childhood with several abductions, and then after a certain point of time, they don't have them anymore because they didn't fit the bill for the project that they wanted maybe at least one of them for. So, and then you find out, like, if you backtrack, right? Well, what happened in the parent's life that this is what I did, in my own life and other people's lives, where if you're lucky enough to, interview, the parent and the grandparent, maybe the uncle and a cousin, and come to find out, like, oh, they had abductions, and then they had this weird paranormal event at, 16 years, and then they had an incident when they were a child that looks like a classic abduction, but in their culture, they didn't remember it that way. And then, oh, it was set up, So you only know, like in hindsight, what to look for later in the line that says, wait, this was a setup.
Yeah.
So
it's freaky, isn't it, that they've got this technology that they can even, I guess, even if things are not going quite the way they plan on a certain timeline, they can go in and change things and tweak things here and there. It's like, wow.
I think they can, but I also believe that there's good beings out there who are helping, and they understand completely what's happening and have made their own ways of dealing with this on a higher level, so that, we have multiple dimensions, right? And there's a way to look at it on 3D, 4D, 5D, or whatever, how you understand, so that I truly believe that there is a higher way of, once we connect with the authentic, eternal now spirit, whatever you want to call that we are, and a connection with God or the Holy Spirit, or however you perceive it. And I'm not talking about spirit guides. I'm talking about authentic realization. When you get to that level of comprehending reality, then you can perceive that there's a greater everything happens for the greater good, as long as your purity of intention in your destiny with the highest is happening. So you only know this in maybe transcendental experiences, where if you have a near-death experience and then you're connected with this more expansive sense of who we are,
Mm-hmm.
and then that it makes sense of things, like you realize all the things that set up in your life had been for the greater good of something else that's part of a greater destiny. So I believe that's happening too with certain people who are even in these bloodline families, because not everybody who's in one of these families is quote evil or
Mm-hmm.
totally manipulated or MK Ultra. There's some people like you experience with your clients, they're extraordinary people who must be angels. They
Yeah.
must be angels or some kind of, they're here for a reason, and you know it and you feel it,
Yeah.
because a normal person couldn't even go through that.
No,
You know?
for sure. For sure.
So
Yeah, there's definitely got to be some good running alongside all this madness, right?
yeah, like that. And have you seen that Netflix show? I know I like Netflix sometimes, but there's a show, it was a series, and I think it was 2018-19, called OA.
Oh
And it
yeah, I
was,
saw it.
oh, that was really good, about the jumping to the parallel worlds, which is really interesting, because there's some people that I've talked to who are more sensitive, who've been in these projects anyway, but they may remember parallel worlds, or parallel, like their parallel self. And it's not an alter personality. It doesn't have to do with that. It's more like Man in the High Castle series, where in one reality, let's say the Nazis won the war. I'm just using that as an example, where like, oh, in this parallel world, like, you know that on a certain timeline, you remember who you are and what you did or what the future was.
Mm.
But remember, like it was a memory in the future. So there's people who remember like parallel lives in the same body, right? But it's like another Earth or another timeline.
Yeah,
So I think something like that does happen.
yeah, yeah. Interesting. So where do you see things right now? We're in a very crazy period of time. There's a lot of truth coming out, but there's the dark are kind of pushing back and trying to get everyone on lockdown. Where do you see us sort of standing at the moment? Do you see the desperation coming from these beings, or do you think they've got things pretty much
Well, I
the way they
definitely,
want at the moment?
yeah, I mean, the ones who are hosted, right? Let's say the satanic ones, I mean, we can just call it for what it is, like the ones who drink blood and do sacrifice, and Babylonian gods, right? Human sacrifice, blood sacrifice, sexual torture, the whole 9 yards. They're hosted by the non-human malevolent ones, if they've made the blood oaks, and that there's a point of no return, I think, that happens after a certain point where their behavior would be predictably psychopathic.
Which is,
So if they plan on contesting the election, even though there's a landslide for Trump, for example, and I'm not saying, they're going to do whatever they can to do what they can based on who they are and their nature.
mm,
So it really depends on like what's the higher destiny that needs to play out in such a way that the greatest good can be done for the true souls. And I know it goes back to some biblical kinds of, we can call it a script or a narrative, we call the Book of Revelation, but I think it's not just the Book of Revelation. I think even in other cultures, they kind of have a view of a prophetic, with the trinary system coming in, and what happens when that happens, and a new sun and a new reality. And so I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be negative, but I think that certain things have to play out according to a higher plan, and to trust in your own connection to the Most High,
mm-hmm.
God, or whatever you want to call it, and trust what your connection is for you in this time. So a lot of people are being led to feeling like, oh, well, you need to do this and you need to do that based on all these things that are happening. But I would say always reconnect with your highest source of wisdom for who you are, and act accordingly to whatever you feel is the highest and best good for you and your connection to the Most High. Because we can be well, let's put it this way. In my view, as a psychologist, I know that if I'm dealing with a narcissist psychopath who's demonically hosted, and if I was in a relationship and I wanted to do compassionate communication skills with them, guess what would happen? They're gonna fucking they're friggin' gaslight the shit out of you. They'll abuse you. They'll spear campaign you. They'll torture you. They'll abuse you, and they can't be trusted. Okay, so if you want to communicate and talk about your feelings and negotiate and do all the right things, they're going to be like, you know, the pig in a pig pen who's better at fighting in a pig pen because that's what they are. So this is like, we have to take a whole different strategy of learning how to deal with the psychopath. And so, you know, I'm not saying don't fight back for what you know is right and true when you have something sacred to protect and defend, because your life and your spirit is very important to defend and protect. But when you're dealing with a narcissist, psychopath, whatever you want to call it, basically, they don't take responsibility. You'll never get closure. What do you think with the election? You're not going to get closure, are you? Well, this is like fighting with a narcissist. Trying to get closure in a relationship issue where you've been very hurt, if they've done something wrong and you know it, you even have proof, you ain't going to get closure with a fucking narcissist, all right? Excuse my French. So you got a gray rock and you got a no contact and you got to rebuild with what you want, with who you want, and develop relationships and strength with people who are not psychopaths and who are not narcissists. And build where you can build and protect what you can.
The smear campaigns as well. I love a smear campaign.
God, it's horrible. And, you know, they're very good at what they do. And, you know, I fell for it. I don't know how many times. So, and this is
our weakness, isn't it? Love is our weakness. Like everyone wants to feel love, and we live in a world where, let's face it, it's not a whole lot of love around. And so I think on some level we're all craving that kind of love, and so we kind of gravitate to anything that might give us a bit, even if it's only a breadcrumb.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely feels like breadcrumbing it with a whatever love that we can get or feel. And this is where I guess it kind of moves in with, like, in recovery. When you're recovering from something, you have to rebuild on learning how to get your basic animal needs met, which is finding loving kindness, care, nurturing, safety, and security, and learning how to build on that gives you good feelings so that you can start building your energy and building your power to create your reality with your spirit fully embodied. And pulling in the spiritual power only happens when you work with the lower levels of your basic energy needs, which kind of goes back into like the real recovery process. We must grieve our losses. And many people, they try to bypass this with all psychobabble or, you know, addictions, distractions, or spiritual bypassing with the fake spirit guide, ascension, whatever you want to call it. People are trying to bypass one of the most basic things that we just don't want to feel icky feelings, right? We don't want to feel loss and sadness, but sometimes that's exactly just what we need to do. We just need to like be alone and cry for a while and not fight it. Just grieve the losses and rebuild with real people who actually care, or like with an animal or a pet, or with gardening or anything that brings about natural goodness and loving kindness. Really simple, but it's actually hard to do. It feels like there's a commodity of love in the world. Like it's so hard to find.
Exactly.
But maybe when we recover, I think that when we truly recover our own authentic self, that the universe, we can call it universe, and God will actually bring things in your path, and where you know that the universe is flowing with you, and that you caught the wave, and it will bring you what you need, and to have faith. And once this happens over and over again, it increases your confidence in your faith that God is really with you, working with you, and will show you and tell you what you need to do, what you need to feel, where you need to go. You will have that intuitive connection.
I agree. It's certainly been the case with me. Moving in line with your purpose and that inner calling, and speaking your truth, and just like you say, doing what you feel to be right in the moment. And yeah, I think the universe does have your back to a certain extent, and it does give you that extra, you know, faith that something good is working inside you. And what they do is obviously they try and get everyone to look outside of themselves, don't they, for a savior or a leader. And that's one thing I've been talking a lot about right now. And it all takes us away from our own sovereignty and our own power. So
yeah, looking outside ourselves. I think that's a codependent thing. I mean, that was for me, you know, I was one of these people who was always like looking outside myself. I mean, I love knowledge and I love learning. I'm just like an insatiable scientist anyway. But I think that getting comfortable with how are you really feeling, getting into the root of like, how are you really feeling and what are you really believing about yourself and the world, and start trusting your own feelings in terms of how you feel around certain people or experiences, and then knowing when, for example, you have an exaggerated emotional trigger or emotional flashback, which is part of complex PTSD, which is something that I work with people, and then knowing what's like your authentic intuitive feelings that's not exaggerated, but the knowing if it is exaggerated where it's coming from. And so not letting someone tell you what your reality is all the time until you lose your compass. And that's what happens in narcissistic abuse, or even, you know, alien love bite. You get completely thrown off your inner compass, and they'll try to do that because that's how they feed on your energy anyway. So
well, they do. They get in on your triggers, don't they? If you've got a wound, and especially if you're in a relationship, they'll try and mess with the relationship because they hate love, and they'll try and get in on the trigger of each person, won't they? And trying to turn the volume up and cause arguments and that kind of stuff. It's all fun and
I find it amazing. It's amazing and sad, but I think that they can't stop you from loving.
no.
They can't stop you from loving yourself and having honor and integrity and following that honor and ethics. And I think that once they know, you know, let's say, you know, a narcissist, they tend to do a discard, for example, or they'll figure, oh, they can't really take advantage of you, and they'll just kind of like leave you alone, or they'll do a smear campaign, or they'll just do a discard kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's actually a good sign, although it's hard for somebody who's like they lost a friend or lost a lover or lost a job, or, you know, if you keep on and keeping on, that you will recover and you'll be better than you were before. You know,
Just remembering how powerful we are, that they have to do all this to us, huh?
Yeah, that's true.
It is true. Well, Eve, it's been a pleasure. Just before you go, just for the listeners, you can check out Eve's work on her website, evelorgan.com, where you can find her book. Look, they've just started banging.
Good timing, eh?
The Matrix, huh? You can find her book, The Love Bite, and she's also got a Facebook group, Alien Love Bite, where you can connect on there. So Eve, it's been lovely having you on. I've really enjoyed. I could speak to you for hours and hours. Honestly, it's so interesting. That's why I wanted you to have you on so much. So thanks for coming on. And guys, yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe. Are you on YouTube, Eve? Have you got a YouTube channel?
I haven't added my own videos. I'm just on everybody else's channel when I get interviewed, and I can't do all the IT work, let's face it. So no, I really don't have my own channel. It is, but it's just about the book. And that was like many years ago. I'm embarrassed.
No,
So,
fantastic work, groundbreaking work. So lovely to have you on, and you enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll get before this banging gets any worse.
Okay, thank you.